You are watching Apostolic Radio Charlotte.
Said in the book of John, I am come that you might have life and have it more abundantly. And today I want to talk about a very unique passage in the scripture that you probably have read and you have not thought about it in this way. But we will read in Matthew 14 and 22. You just can listen. Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he sent the multitudes away. Brother Adam, I still have no monitors up here. Whatever you're doing, it's not working. So I want to talk to you today for a little while about this issue of personal boundaries. This is not something you probably hear much, especially in the context of a Bible study. But I want you to think about the fact that it directly impacts your effectiveness as an individual and your joy as a believer and your ability to turn your walk with God into a long distance journey rather than a short distance sprint. When we come to church, we normally hear just more and more about things such as serving the Lord, giving our all, give until it hurts, etc., etc. Can I have an amen? We've heard that. We're comfortable with that. In fact, if you're a churchy person, and most of us here in Life Class are very churchy people, if we have anyone here today who doesn't consider themselves very churchy, we're so glad you're here. If you can just survive a little while with us churchy people, things will be okay. As churchy people, we're quite used to coming to church and basically getting some version of this. It's not enough. Must do more. This is like heresy, isn't it? Some of you are so nervous right now. I understand that. I am quite well acquainted with that. I am usually the one preaching it, teaching it, asking it. And so I want to say, first of all, thank you for everything you do for the Lord. And thank you for the sacrifice you do give to the Lord. Today I want to talk about this process of setting healthy limits. Everybody needs a warning light before they're stranded on the side of the road. Friday, my wife and I were on a road trip, and Brother Adam still have no monitors. You might need to recruit some help from get Brother Carlos to go up to this amp room and see if there's a problem up there. Just anoint it in Jesus' name, and then we'll do a victory march and it'll all be better. Does it sound normal out there? I can't tell. Sounds normal? Okay, well then I won't worry about it. So here we go. If we do not have some kind of a warning system in our lives, we give and give and give, and pretty soon we realize we have nothing to give. And rather than being restored, we've formed a crisis for ourselves. You guys understand what I'm talking about? My wife and I were driving on a road trip, and everything was going grand. We were having a wonderful time. She was just telling me how amazing I am as a husband and how perfect I know every need she has. And that conversation was going not like that, but something. And we were riding along, and all of a sudden the rear tire blew. And we were doing, I won't tell you how fast we were going unless you make me feel guilty about it. But the car my car doesn't have a flat. It has these ridiculous run flat tires. I'll never own another run flat tire, because when it does go flat, sure, you can get to the next exit, but they're in a tire store in town that has it. So you're never on the side of the highway, but you can never find a tire either. So it's like fire or frying pan. And so we tried to drive on a little ways that got worse and worse. We finally had to stop, and we're stuck on the side of the road for 2 hours. It's fine. We were fine. We had friends who were coming. They picked us up, took care of us, bind up the wounds, poured in the oil and the wine. everything was fine. So the point is wouldn't it have been amazing if before I left my house there had been a warning light that popped on that said this tire is about to blow out in about 60 miles. It could have saved so much trouble. You understand what I'm saying? A life can be like that. And I want to show you this picture here of Jesus calling an end to the ministry effort. He sends the disciples away, and he sends the multitudes away. And when he had sent, verse 23, the multitudes away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. He had given, he had given until he had nothing more to give. And he said, okay, that's enough. This is a picture of a boundary. He has a boundary, and he says that's where I am going to stop. If you want to be miserable on a regular basis, then just transgress boundaries in your life, and you will find that they have a way of exacting their pound of flesh from you. We all have things we want to do. We want to be better parents. We want to be better spouses. We want to be better witnesses. We want to be better church workers. I want to be a better pastor, et cetera, et cetera. You want to be better in your career. The needs just are continually before you. The needs are continually pulling at you. And so this becomes an issue of how much can I give before I send the disciples away, send the crowds away, and I go for a reset somehow. Let me give you some ideas of personal signs. Think of these as warning lights on the dashboard of life that you need to establish some boundaries. Do you find yourself often saying yes when you really mean no? Do you often find yourself telling someone yes just so they'll go away? You have no intention of doing it. You just don't know how to say no. And so you say yes when you really mean no. Do you find yourself horribly guilty when you say no? Do you find yourself shortchanging yourself or your family in order to please somebody else? Do you find yourself not speaking up when you really have something that you need to say? Do you find yourself pretending to agree with somebody just for the sake of being accepted? When you are mistreated in some way, do you just take it, or do you demand at some level, in a Christian way, shall I throw that in, some level of respect? Are you giving something that it's really just to achieve acceptance, or really just to be perceived as useful? Are you allowing others to say things to you or in front of you that make you very uncomfortable, but you just take it because you don't know what else to do, and it's just too exhausting to stand up for yourself? All of these are warning lights. Now, let me say initially, everybody I know does some version of these things. Everybody I know is guilty of saying yes sometimes when we mean no, of agreeing to things we really don't want to give or share. And so some of it is just life. You understand what I mean? Some of it is just life. But it is a warning sign that a larger problem might be just ahead in some manner. So I want to give you the first myth that comes with boundaries. And this myth goes like this. If I set boundaries, if I say no, then I am being selfish. Selfish is a term loaded with meaning in our society. Sometimes the right thing to do is to be selfish. we just don't know how to see that. Sometimes the right thing to do is recognize when you have nothing else to give and to make a difference. I'll make a confession to you as a way of trying to put myself in a transparent position. When right after 2008, our church, along with the whole country, went into a financial downdraft. Started 2008. I had just become the pastor, and I wasn't sure if it was a sign that I was a bad pastor or if there was a nationwide recession. I wasn't sure. And so when I was feeling good, it was just, nationwide recession. When I was down on myself, that I was a personal failure as a pastor. You wouldn't understand that kind of a thing. But it wasn't just us. It was all of the world. You guys remember the Great Recession started in 2008, collapse of Lehman Brothers, et cetera, et cetera. World markets sold off, currencies craters. It was a big problem. Many people lost their jobs. Many people had to be repurposed. I was living through on two levels. I had a construction company. My construction company revenues were being cut in half. Same time, church revenues were being cut, maybe not in half, but there was it was a recession. And at that time, I was trying to, as smoothly as possible, without making a big deal about it, or without trying to take up some special offering all the time. I had to rationalize it, so I had to figure out what to do. And I decided to go through all our commitments that we make to national headquarters. And I'm ashamed of this, but it perfectly brings this illustration to light. I had to add up how much we were giving every month. I had to go through every missionary we had. I had to figure out how much we could give and it not be flaky money. You know what flaky money is? Flaky money is when you commit something you really can't give. It's flaky. Maybe it'll work out. So you can't give that way to missions. It has to be good money. It can't just be flaky. So some months we didn't have it, some months we did. It was a difficult time. And so we were trying to go into a construction project. It was just tough. I had to go through, and I had to write a letter to headquarters, and I had to say, we've been giving this much a month, and we can no longer give that much. We have to deduct it somewhat. When we can give it again, we will. And it was personally embarrassing for me to write that letter. Why? Because my dad is Mr. UPC. There is not an office in the North Carolina district he hasn't held that I know of. Maybe ladies auxiliary later. He is the man. You go anywhere. Oh, you're David Elms' son. Yeah, you little old me. I'm just glad to be here. I'm a dorkfish. And here, 2 years after I become the pastor, 18 months after I become the pastor, the first thing I have to do is write a letter and say, we cannot keep doing this. Okay, it would be bad stewardship. And the difficult thing is that it feels like selfishness. But if you don't have boundaries, then it's not just your money that's flaky. It's your whole life that's flaky. What did Jesus teach on the Sermon on the Mount? Your yea should be yea, your nay should be nay. What does he mean by that? There's no point. He's talking about a higher standard, not just an outward standard, but an inward standard. They make vows to show, yeah, I may have lied the last 2 times, but this time I really mean it. I'm making a vow. Don't be like that. If you say it, it should mean something. It's not flaky. Boundaries in our life are necessaries. Otherwise, we end up being flaky people. We're making commitments that we can't keep. We're making promises that mean not that much because, well, after all, we did not have any boundary set. This is true in establishing our personal budgets, yes. It's very true, but I don't want to get you all under too much conviction talking about a personal budget. I want you to think of it as more than that, though. It is true in the whole of our life. And the idea that if I set a boundary, I am being selfish. You can always make an argument that if I set a boundary, I'm being selfish. But let me balance that with this. Am I also being true? Okay, you guys with me? You understand what I mean by that? It may seem selfish, but it is also true. And so we're not just called to have this sense where everything's given away, everything, because that turns us into people who do not, our yea is not yea and our nay is not nay. Oh, I meant to get there, but I had 7 other commitments that day. And so I'm not going to make it. I know you depended on me being there. But because I don't have boundaries in my life, my yays cannot be yay and my nays cannot be nay because I have no boundaries in my life. So I want you to think about this. Rather than thinking about setting a boundary in your life just as selfishness, I would like you to think of it as stewardship. Is that fair? Are you guys with me? It's not just being generous, it's about being true. And so when we have a discipline of spiritual of stewardship in our life, it allows us to acknowledge that all of us have limited resources, time, energy, emotional energy. We have limitations in our life, and we have to balance them as good stewards. You guys with me, or am I killing the spirit on you? We probably need it. We probably need it. That's the sign that the sign that they're enjoying it is when they say amen. The sign that they need it is when they sit there quiet. New theory of teaching. The second myth that comes is if I set a boundary, it's not just a sign of being selfish. It is a sign of being disobedient. I am somehow failing. There is. Let me address an issue here very quickly that is real in our society, and that is there are circumstances where an individual can get in, and they really are not just taken advantage of. They are, in some sense, abused. And what I mean by that is I have even seen church cultures where it got to a point where people were so stretched that if they did not follow or obey, then their boundary was a sign of rebellion. In other words, your unwillingness to go along shows you have a rebellious heart. I would want to caution all of us from that. I don't believe that is the spirit of the Lord Jesus Christ. I don't believe that's the spirit of the Lord that He shows in the Word of the Lord. I think if you read much in Jesus' life, yes, the words of Jesus create tension. This is something I've been personally working with so much lately. When so much of the words of Jesus create tension, and we struggle to get it right because on one hand we're being stretched, on the other hand we're being compressed. And so there is a tension in the Lord's words, but I would want you to think in terms of making a commitment to the Lord that is maintainable. It's not just 30 days of excitement or 40 days of effort or 2 months of zeal. It is something you can live with, you can walk with, because we are in a marathon and not a sprint, as we often say. Fear is a terrible reason to let our boundaries be trampled. John tells us fear has to do with punishment, and the one who is afraid cannot be made perfect in love, 1 John 4. If we say yes out of fear, we're not really being people who are motivated by by love. Let me read from 2 Corinthians 9 and 7. Each one of you must give as you have made up your mind, not reluctantly or under compulsion. See, it's the word of the Lord. It has to be something that is in our hearts. It has to be something that is overflowing our lives and our own sense of blessing. This idea that we give freely and without compulsion, for the God loves a cheerful giver. And so this idea of boundaries in our life, it can be difficult for us to understand their relationship and feel guilty over setting boundaries. Another example here that's in the church that I would like to use as an example is the fact that almost, I'd say, two or three Sundays a month at our church, somebody, or sometimes on Wednesday night, somebody that I don't know, that no one in the church knows, somebody that just randomly comes in, will come and ask for money. Sometimes they will start out in the vestibule and they'll start asking the ushers. And the ushers have this wonderful plan, and not just the ushers, but some of you guys, they ask you, there's this wonderful plan, and the plan goes like this. Let's let Brother Nate say no. Let's send them all to Brother Nate because he don't have anything to do. He's just up there running his mouth anyway. I'm picking on my ushers today. If that's what they do, it's my fault because I haven't told them otherwise. So, anyway, that's the plan. I don't handle the money at the church. I can just see Brother Anthony back there. I don't handle the money at the church. Ask the pastor. Yeah, he's just down at the altar. Nothing good's happened down there. Let's just go get him. And And so they come down here. And I have some of the craziest stories I have in the church are people asking for money. I had a guy standing out here when the offices used to be over here. I was standing in front of the office. Guy started asking for money, and he was real angry about it. And I must have been in an unchristian mood at that moment. I don't know. But I told him, and I don't do this anymore, but I was young. This was when I was associate pastor. He just caught me out there. Mom and Dad were out jet setting somewhere doing UPC glorious acts, and I was left with all the trouble at home. And so they're off, receiving some honor of greatness. And I'm stuck over here with the angry bum. So I'm over here, the angry bum. And he's like all up in my face and everything. And it pushed the wrong button in me because sometimes I have uncharitable elements in me. And that's another problem that the bishop doesn't have. But although he does say a lot, some people just need a good whipping. So this guy over here just needed a good whipping. And so here I am. And I don't remember what I said. I was trying to explain, and he just would not take it. And finally I said this to him. I said, if I was going to help people I absolutely didn't know, I said, it wouldn't be you. I said, look at you. I said, you're in your 30s. I said, look at you. You're strong. I said, I don't see you have a limp on you. You're not limping. You didn't limp in here. I said, look how strong you are. I said, you're a man. I said, you could go out here and take care of yourself. I said, there's people in our society, they have little children and their life is a mess. I'd help them before I helped you. I said, look at you. You're a man. Look how strong you are. Well, he didn't like that. He got more in my face. And he said, he got all up like that in my face. And I don't know what it was, but at that moment, it was so funny to me. I busted out laughing. Now, I'm not a tough guy or anything. I'm not trying to be a tough guy. It just was funny to me that I was going to get beat up by an angry bum in front of my own office. So I'll tell you the truth. Not just our church, every church I know has been burned by giving money to people they do not know. Our church, we help as a lot of people. We give a lot of money, but if we do not know them, then we really are unable to just float cash, because most people use the cash for things other than developing a stable life. It's not just us; it's every church I know of does not give money to strangers. They have programs. And so this boundary here recently, I had a young man down here in the front of the church tell me off. You should be ashamed of yourself. What is the church about unless it's helping poor people? I mean, he told me off down here, and I sat there. I said, "I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm sorry you feel that way." And finally, I just said, "Okay, you can either participate, leave, or we'll call the police. It's your choice." And he didn't back down a bit. So I walked him out. I said, "You're no longer welcome here." I walked him out. I got him back here to the door. And Brother Larry's not here today. Brother Larry met me back there, and I had this guy back there on the back leaking out the door. And Brother Larry come walking up. He had his usher jacket on, and I said, "Will you escort this young man out of the church?" And Brother Larry said, "I'd be glad to escort him out of this church." We think of boundaries as these negative things, but I want you to think of them differently. If just because you set a boundary doesn't mean you're being selfish. Just because you set a boundary doesn't mean you are being disobedient or rebellious. Just because you set a boundary doesn't mean that you are willing to hurt anyone else. By having boundaries, you become a person who is true. Your yea is yea and your nay is nay. We all want to give help. We all want to be generous. We all want to share. But we must understand how boundaries do not hurt us. They help us. They are not a hindrance. They are a blessing in our lives. And when you're setting boundaries with people and you're trying to explain yourself, there is a very important thing that I think we all could do better on. I know I could do better on it. And that is this. When you're setting it, the secret is to remain cheerful and remain loving. Don't put an edge of irritation in your voice, like sometimes I have been guilty of doing. Do not show your frustration, as sometimes I am guilty of doing, but with cheerfulness and with confidence say, I'm not going to be able to do that. And let me close with this. And I have a lot of other things that I just forget that. I always run out of time. Let me tell you one more story, because I think it's sometimes in the stories where we learn the application rather than in the theory. I have a pastor friend of mine who is the pastor of a very small church. He's working a full-time job, third shift. He has small children, and he recently has come under a lot of pressure. He was asking me, he called me for advice, and he came under a lot of pressure to start another church. There's a work there, and they wanted him not just to pastor where he was, but they wanted him to go down the road 30 miles and start another church. And he called me and he said, I'm so frustrated. He said, I feel like if I say no, that it's a sign that I don't love the lost. And I feel like if I don't go along with this, then I'm going to be painted as a rebel. And so I asked him, I said, well, brother, let me ask you a few questions. I already knew the answer to the questions. I was trying to lead him down the path. I said, are you a full-time pastor? He said, no, I work third shift, so I end up working all night long, and what sleep I can get, I get during the day. And I said, so you're working to support yourself. Is your wife full time? Is she a stay-at-home mom? No, she has to work too. Okay. Do you have little children you are spending too much time with? He said, no, I'm not being as good a dad as I need to be. I said, are you spending too much time with your wife? And sometimes it just smites you about the head, neck, and shoulders. I am too good of a husband. This is exhausting. He said, no, if anything, I feel guilty about the time I spend with my wife. I said, you have random time at your church where you're just hanging out. You're like, man, I wish I had something to do. He said, absolutely not. He said, you know my life. And I said, well, you can't say yes to both. You can only say yes to one. Anything less is going to be, if you try to say yes to both, you say no to both. And the hardest thing in the world is learning the truth that in order to say yes to one obligation, you have to say no to other obligations. There comes a point in our life where we have to decide. We're thankful for good jobs. We're thankful for good careers. I pray we all have them. But there comes a point where your career has taken too much from you and you need to figure it out. You're not in church. Your family is on the ropes. It's too much. You are out of balance. And by saying yes to every request of your job, you're really saying no to the people you love the most. You're saying no to your relationship with God. And so it is in all of our life. There's a point where even Jesus said, that's enough. You disciples, I'm done with you. Get in the boat and be gone with your bad selves. Just out. Go. That's enough. Crowd, the village is that way. Well, where are you going, Lord? I have more problems. The poor you'll have with you always, for the love of God. You go to the village. You see what I'm saying? And Jesus goes away by himself, and he restores himself. God help us all to understand that. And by saying no at this moment, he's saying yes to something else. Because just a little while later, the disciples are going to be in a storm. And Jesus is going to come walking on the waves. Sometimes when you say no, it's just the flip side of saying yes. Is that fair? Let's stand. All right. Well, unexpected life class themes. That's what I taught on today. Amen. We're going to take a little break before we start a worship service. Again, our ladies, remember the restroom situation. There's 2 behind here. There's one out in the side vestibule, and there's half a dozen next door. And we'll give you a little bit of time before we start our next service. All right. God bless.
Thank you for watching Apostolic Radio Charlotte. Come, worship with us.